This week on Writers, Inc.
It is interesting when you think about it because, like you said, it's like what keeps the readers, going from, them being in a relationship where, in a lot of other books, that's ideally, the end of the book is them getting married. But at least for me, when I think of Marriage of Convenience, it's kind of like the beauty of it is having these two people learning to live together, because I feel like you don't really ever know someone until you live with them. And just that clash of, two personalities. It's a very everyday thing of getting to know someone, the goods and the bads with them. That was my goal with Winnipeg is, two people learning to live together and grow life from there. But at least in this case, it's also getting to know each other under different conditions.
J.K. Rowling was nearly homeless when she wrote the first Harry Potter book. Stephen King penned Carrie on a small desk wedged between a washer and dryer. James Patterson worked in advertising and famously crafted the Toys R Us theme song long before becoming an author. Join New York Times bestseller J.D. Barker and a panel of industry powerhouses as they pull back the curtain on some of the world's most prolific authors. Where did they start? What is their process? The biggest names in publishing all have origin stories, all have tips and secrets. What does it take to consistently top the bestseller lists and become a household name? Get your notepad out. School's in session. This is Writers, Inc.
Hi, it's Christine Daigle.
Kevin Tumlinson.
And this is JD Barker. Welcome to Writers, Inc. So I just mowed my lawn, and I've got like a sweeper thing on the back of my riding lawnmower that picks up all the leaves. Lawn looked fantastic. No leaves out there. I've been inside for maybe 10 minutes. I just looked out the window, and it's covered again. It's the one thing I miss about Florida is not having to deal with all that. Like fall and seasons and stuff like that. Yeah, it's fantastic until you have to break out the rake.
It's so pretty, though.
It is, yeah. I mean, I'm in New England. I'm looking outside, like the trees, like all yellow and gold and red, and it's beautiful to look at. But like, I don't want to clean it up.
There's got to be a neighbor kid that you can toss $5 to say, go do this, run this mower over all that.
No, not in my neighborhood.
$5 an acre for JD.
I'm surrounded by wealthy people where like the kids have people to do their stuff. They rent out their chore list. Like I don't think any of them actually do stuff like that.
Yeah.
I grew up mowing lawns. So like that was as soon as my dad got me a lawnmower, like, and I could push that thing. Like I was all over the neighborhood making money, but that does not happen around here.
Yeah. Didn't happen where I grew up either, because every house was at least like 2 miles, 3 miles away. So, a little kid pushing a lawnmower for 3 miles at a stretch for one neighbor, though. So
that's a lot. Yeah.
Like every neighbor is like a 10-mile hike.
Oh, does your daughter like jumping in those leaves though?
She does, which is why I do it during the daytime when she's at school, because otherwise I get it all cleaned up and she's, leaf pile, yay, jumps in there and like it's all over the yard again 3 minutes later.
90% of the point of raking up leaves, man, is to let your kid and your dog jump in them.
I think that might be the answer. I have to teach my daughter to use the rake so she can make her own leaf pile to jump in. Go. And then, and then I can watch from inside. And
that's entrepreneurial problem solving right there.
That is the way to go. All right. We've got Patrick is out. JP is out. Kevin, what is in the news?
In the news, Penguin Random House launches High Schoolers Award to combat book bans. The publisher's $10,000 Freedom of Expression Prize invites teens to write about a banned book that changed their life. Against a backdrop of rising censorship, the winners, not the censors, but the winners will also receive ongoing mentorship opportunities. The competition opened on the 16th of October and will close on the 16th of January, or when 1,000 applications have been submitted, whichever comes first. I like this. Well, this is an encouraging.
I like it too. Now we just have to figure out how to get the banned book into the kids' hands so that they can write about the banned book.
I think that's being covered, though. Like I was in Barnes & Noble like maybe 2 days ago, and they have entire tables that are nothing but banned books. So, I mean, I think the word is out or can get out.
That's one hell of a marketing plan if you think about it. Like you just put a table out there with a sign that says, these are the books nobody wants you to read. Yeah. And like you can guarantee that table will be empty by lunchtime, right?
Why do you think Barnes & Noble's even bothering with that? There's no point in Barnes & Noble getting on this bandwagon for any other reason. It's all promotion at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are lots of libraries that do out-of-state ebooks for kids who are in states with banning laws. So they should be able to get them.
Yeah. I still, when it comes to the whole banned book thing, like it does bother me, but I understand where like schools and libraries would be coming from. And I don't think a lot of times it's not banning the book because they hate literature or something like that. It really is often this is me being on the other side of the fence. Okay. But it really is often about making sure that kids aren't exposed to things that the parents themselves wouldn't find inappropriate or something. I just think it gets carried way too far, gets way too out of hand. There were plenty of books that were, quote, banned when I was in high school, and it didn't, nothing bad happened. Nobody became illiterate. Nobody, missed out on opportunities. You eventually read them.
I read some books way too young, and I'm mostly okay. So,
well, that's the other thing. Yeah.
Mostly.
All right. No Fakes Act wants to protect actors and singers from unauthorized AI replicas. A new bipartisan bill seeks to create federal rules around using digital replicas of people's faces, voices, and likenesses without consent. It would prevent unauthorized AI-created versions of artists and actors, with exceptions for parodies, satire, and criticism. The bill aims to standardize likeness laws, which currently vary state by state as AI proliferates. Some industry groups welcome it, but a legal expert argues it may just duplicate existing copyright and publicity laws rather than offer new protections. And that's exactly what my first thought on that was. We already have these laws.
All right. So just so I understand this, when I go on TikTok and Cartman is singing Metallica, that's going to be protected and they'll be okay because it's a parody.
That's
right?
what it's supposed to be.
Well, that's what it's supposed to be. Yeah.
All right. Then I'm cool with this. As long as Cartman can keep singing whatever he wants to sing, I'm fine.
Yeah. That's
the problem with
they're just trying to standardize it, right? Like, because there are so many fragmented publicity laws, copyright laws in different states. It's hard to protect people, right?
Yeah.
Protect their image. Yeah.
Yeah. And I can kind of understand why they would want to do this, but like I said, and like the article states, there's already laws that are aimed at this. The problem is when it comes to parody, as someone who used to do back in the day, I was part of a little troupe of people, and we would do these anime parody dubs. I'm not even a fan of anime, but these were kind of a blast. They were sort of my first foray into writing for screen, and they all fell under parody in terms of copyright, and that's how we were able to make them and put them in all these festivals all over the place. But you would frequently get people who would come after you anyway. We had the studio that was responsible for Voltron, for example, sued us and forced us to take it down, and it didn't matter that we could clearly show that it was parody and not, we weren't profiting off of it in any way. They just went after it as a means of protecting their copyright. And that's where things get tricky. So if anything comes out of this at all, I'd love for them to clarify what parody is. That would be a very helpful thing. Parody and satire.
Yeah. That's the tricky part though, right? You can sue anyone for anything. It doesn't mean you're going to win, but if you have a lot of money, then, yeah. The other thing is, I'm scared they might make contradictory laws. And then what happens if we've got federal laws contradicting state laws, and that gets into a whole mess too.
Well, international too, right? I mean, whatever we decide here in the U.S. doesn't mean that the rest of the world has to follow suit.
That's why if you're going to make parody and satire, do it anonymously. All right.
And it better be funny.
If you're going to make Tom Hanks toothpaste commercials,
I'd like to see somebody parody us. I'd like to see a Writers Inc. parody for those listening.
That would be fun. Yeah.
I invite you. I dare you. I challenge you. All right. Scholastic apologizes, will end controversial book fair offering. After backlash, Scholastic said it would discontinue its optional diverse books, in quotes, case that allowed schools to exclude those titles from fairs. Scholastic apologized for the pain caused and said segregating diverse books was a mistake, pledging to fight book banning laws. The change came after 1,500 plus authors and illustrators signed a letter urging Scholastic to stop the exclusionary practice. Scholastic said it will find alternate ways to get more books to kids and remains committed to diverse authors. This is kind of related to other stuff we've talked about, but.
Yeah, when this first came up, like the only image in my head is like the Scholastic rep outside of the school. Going, come here. Like leading somebody around to the back of the van, opening the door and
I'm picturing trench coats. Yeah.
There's got to be trench coats. That's a given, right? For what it's worth, my daughter came home with the Scholastic catalog the other day. She's in first grade now, and I flipped through that whole thing looking for something related to this, and there wasn't a damn thing in there. Like, it was all, the same, Berenstein Bears and stuff that I remember when I was a kid. That doesn't mean that that's the same catalog everybody got, but that's the one that I saw. So I'm not even sure where these banned books, like if they are just completely not being mentioned in there or what the deal is. But like, I didn't see anything related to this.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone else had a chance to read the article, but so they had an optional diversity pack that you could get added. And they're trying to spin it as, oh, there are already all these diverse books in our fair, and these are just more diverse books that you can get if you want. We weren't excluding them. Yeah, okay. But that's kind of what that was.
They were extra
I'm not going to
diverse.
assume their motives. I'll
Diverse.
take them at face value for what they're saying, but that's
big of you, Kevin.
That is big of me. I think though, we discussed this on another episode, but the idea was they had this group of books segmented off. We all kind of agreed that was a bad practice. But the schools, anyone ordering these books still has the opportunity to check off a book that they don't want individually. So I think that's still fine. But grouping everything together, I mean, what's to prevent them from, these are books that feature Black characters, so we're going to put all those in their own separate box. What's to prevent that from happening? So. Yeah, and they would defend that under that same set of terms too. Like, well, we're offering these. This is our Black History Month box set, and it just inadvertently. It's all that like unintended consequences thing.
Yeah, exactly.
This episode is brought to you by AutoCrit. One of the most value-packed memberships for any author, AutoCrit brings you an amazing suite of tools that make it a breeze to plan, write, and edit your books all in one place. AutoCrit takes you far above standard grammar checking or cookie cutter guidance. Instead, it's like having an experienced editor in your genre watching over your shoulder to help you deliver great writing that keeps your audience trapped in the story. You can even compare your writing style to more than 100 best-selling authors right down to the word level, so you can see what the best in the business do to keep their storytelling clean, clear, and crisp. Listeners of the Writers Inc. podcast can now take advantage of lifetime membership for one single fee. That's right, no renewal fees.
Hi, this is JD Barker. I've used AutoCrit for years, and not only has it improved my writing, but it's been a crucial tool with aspiring authors that I've mentored. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just beginning, it'll help you find your weak spots and weed them out. Give it a shot with your latest project. Trust me, your editor will thank you.
Head to autocrit.com/JD to get your lifetime membership. Big thanks to AutoCrit for sponsoring the show.
All right, cool. So JD, who's up this week?
This week we've got Mariana Zapata coming on. She's a former indie author who recently signed a trad deal for her latest novel. It's called The Wall of Winnipeg and Me. She also has a very solid handle on TikTok. At last check, she had over 250,000 views. That is billion with a B. So I'm looking forward to hear what she has to say. Mariana Zapata.
So we're discussing your book, The Wall of Winnipeg, which is a slow burn marriage of convenience sports romance. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the book?
Sure. The book is exactly what you've said. It is a slow burn sports romance with the marriage of convenience between a football player and the assistant who has a very love-hate relationship with him, mostly more hate. But I think that that's something that a lot of us can relate to when you work with just that perfect boss that just drives you insane. But I feel like that really adds to their dynamic. And the story goes from there. Just an assistant that hasn't been appreciated enough until, she leaves, and then rebuilding a friendship and a relationship from there.
Yeah. And marriage of convenience is a much loved trope by romance readers, but it's tricky to pull off because the characters are already married. So once they fall in love, you have to work to keep them apart.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is interesting when you think about it, because like you said, it's like what keeps the readers, going from, them being in a relationship where, in a lot of other books, that's ideally, the end of the book is them getting married. But at least for me, when I think of marriage of convenience, it's kind of like the beauty of it is having these two people learning to live together. Because I feel like you don't really ever know someone until you live with them. and just that clash of, two personalities. It's a very everyday thing of getting to know someone, the goods and the bads with them. And so I hope in my head that, that was my goal with Winnipeg is, two people learning to live together and grow life from there. But at least in this case, it's also getting to know each other under different conditions. So I think, there's a certain beauty to it, is just seeing how you can make, things grow. And I think the other thing too is, I think divorce rates, I've heard for years are like 50%. So, if you really think about it, no love is, granted, no love is promised. So it's kind of like, I want to convince you that these two characters are going to be together, despite their differences, for the rest of their lives. So that was my goal with my version of Marriage of Convenience, was that.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm curious, like, how do you think about creating obstacles, internal and external, for your characters to keep us in question of whether they're going to stay together?
I mean, that's a really good question, because it's, it's kind of just finding like a middleman in a way of, what you're willing to commit and what you're willing to change. And I think, like, most people, no, not most people, just as human beings, we're not perfect. So, you want to find someone that you can grow with as a human being. And, I want to think that my novels are like, I could kind of see most of my characters being real people. So it's kind of just following that story and those little things, of growing with someone.
Yeah, and for sure they do come off like real people, and Winnipeg is a very slow burn romance. So how do you get the pacing right to keep readers engaged with those slow burns?
For me, writing is very much like a gut feeling. Like I follow my instincts for all of it. So it's always kind of just, I figure things out as I go along. And sometimes that means that I have to go back and rewrite half the book, or, chapter 3 ends up, being better, being chapter 20, or, just moving things along to where it feels more organic and it feels more real. I could never teach a class on how to write because I can't explain it. It's just very like, I always just tell people, I'm like, I just feel it. I just know in my, in my gut, in my heart, when something is right or when it's not working. And I just, I kind of go from there.
Yeah. So just learning to trust your own instincts.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you put any thought and all into like character flaws, like what flaws they'll have and how you match them with a partner? Can you walk us through how that works, especially for Vanessa and Aiden?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's my favorite like thing, and just in people, is figuring out, their flaws, their habits, the things that make them who they are, but also figuring out how to work around them. Because, I would like to believe that, if you're lucky, you'll, end up with your best friend and have a relationship. But that doesn't mean that even like the most wonderful relationships, you can't go to Home Depot and like try and pick out paint together, because that might be, what you can piece together. There's no perfect relationship. And especially with Winnipeg, Vanessa and Aiden are both such stubborn characters in very different ways. Aiden is very used to, getting what he wants because, he's already worked hard. And for him, he's very used to getting exactly what he wants. And Vanessa's stubborn in the way that, she's had to work very, very hard for everything that she's had. And so that makes her stubborn. So it's kind of figuring out how these two very different stubborn personalities can find, again, the middleman, the middle ground between them, and kind of just go from there. But like I said, it's just, there's no perfect relationships. So you just, you figure out how to live with each other, how to love each other, and how to communicate better. I guess that's just like the key to most things, is figuring out how to communicate with another person that you love.
Yeah, I love that. So they're like stubborn, but the opposites of stubborn. They're opposites. Exactly. Yeah, in a lot of ways. Vanessa talks a lot. He doesn't talk at all.
Exactly.
And yeah, she's working hard. She's kind of broke, and he's already put in the work, and he's got a lot of money. How do you use that, like financial status, in a romance?
It's funny because I feel like I love reading that kind of like, call it a power dynamic, but it sort of is to a lot of people. It is, that dynamic change between, like you said, someone who has a lot of money and someone who doesn't. But I think ultimately, like, my goal is that ends up not being a factor when you really love someone. The financial stuff is great, but that's not what's important at the end of the day. So it's like, I love reading it. And as a human being, it's like not something that would ever matter to me. And I feel like that's most women too, like you don't really like need someone to take care of you financially, but you kind of just want someone to go through life with who can like take care of you in the other ways that really matter, so, but it is nice to not have to worry about finances, obviously. So it's kind of finding, how the money is great, but it's not everything, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Just kind of like a catalyst for this relationship, I guess.
No, and in this one, exactly like you said, like she doesn't have money. She's under, has a lot of student loans, and they're just in different places in their lives. But, she's trying to build up her not her relationship, her work, career and things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, this book really isn't centered very much around sports. Would you consider it a sports romance, or is there a difference between like sports romance versus writing a romance with a very athletic main character?
I love that question, to be honest with you, because I've always thought of it in that way. Everyone thinks of Winnipeg as a sports romance, and I'm very quick to be like, it's a sports romance. But really, it's exactly what you said. It's more of a romance with just, a character who happens to be an athlete. I mean, you get to see parts of, his work and the sport that he plays and how much it impacts him as a human being. But at the end of the day, I feel like it's more of just a romance, that has, an athletic main character. But, if he quit at the end of the book, if he retired at the end of the book, it wouldn't matter because, it's more about them building a lasting relationship. So I really do love that question because I really do see it the other way than just it being a sports romance.
Well, I was thinking of it, I guess, from a personal standpoint, because I just don't really care about sports that much, the details. And I'm like, do you think there's a different readership between is there like a hardcore sports romance? Is that a thing? Or
absolutely. Yeah. No, absolutely. Like, you mess up one small detail and football fans are gonna which they should, you should not write a romance unless you have all of your information about whatever it is that you're writing, have it down because, I've caught things before that I'm like, wait a second, that's not how it works. So I completely agree with you. But, I love books that are very heavily, sports related where you learn about sports, but at least for me, I didn't want to write it too much sports and then alienate people, like you said, who don't care. Yeah, care less about it. You know what I mean? I totally understand that. I really do get it. Yeah.
That's good to know. That's a good distinction. So I want to talk a little bit about the beginning of this book. So you've been referred to as one of the lions of indie publishing, with your hashtag on Book Talk having nearly 300 million views. That's incredible. So while Winnipeg was originally indie published and has over 200,000 reviews on Goodreads, how did you get that kind of attention as an indie author? How did that happen?
This is the worst answer I could possibly give, but it's the absolute truth. I literally have no idea, Christine, no idea at all. I didn't do anything. I just have really wonderful readers who are just passionate and so supportive. And, I've been very lucky that they've connected with the characters so much that they want, that they're excited to share it with other people. But literally, I have done nothing. I remember early on in my career, I had one book that did really well, and an author wrote me and they're like, what did you do, to get it to do so well? And I was like, nothing. I just wrote the book. I wasn't even doing marketing back then or anything like that. I had a small audience from writing fan fiction. And so it was just literally word of mouth. I mean, the internet is an amazing and a terrifying place. But when it's amazing, it's, there are no words for it to describe, how wonderful people online can be. Or I guess also too, people always say, all publicity is good publicity. So I guess the people who maybe absolutely hated it as well, some people were like, well, I want to know why someone hates this book. So, you never know, I guess.
I think that's true. I think there are some 1-star reviews where I'm like, wow, that sounds like a great book. I think I'll go check that out. But so I like that answer, because you're saying it's kind of not replicable. It was just kind of organic, and you wouldn't even be like, oh, this is how you could do this.
Yeah, no, it's kind of like, I can't tell you how to get your book, sold and read by, the thousands, just like I can't tell you how to write a book. Unfortunately, it's just one of those things that I don't know. I wish I could give a better answer to both of those.
But it's good to know too. So there's no secret to going viral on TikTok. There's maybe spend your time writing and not trying to go viral.
Thing is that like a lot of readers can tell when someone is authentic with wanting to tell a story, and when they take their time and they're invested in it, or sometimes even when writers just blast out books like this, like I always feel like you can kind of tell the difference between someone who took their time with and were very passionate about something versus I know that there's people who write just for a paycheck, which is fine as well, but maybe that's what it is. It's just being really committed to what you're doing and just hope for the best.
Yeah. And just out of curiosity, how long did it take you to write this book?
To Winnipeg was earlier on in my career when I felt like I was writing fast, which for me at the time was 6 to 8 months. So that's considered like average. That's what I would like every book to be. But realistically, I feel like each one gets harder for me to write and it takes me longer and longer. But yeah.
Well, now you've gone traditional publishing route. Can you talk about how that happened?
It's very crazy. For years, I've had a few conversations with different, big publishers and small publishers, but it didn't feel like the right fit or the right time for me. At that point early on, I was still, still growing my name and growing my brand. And there's only a few books. I feel like I hadn't established myself and for the things that I'm known for now, with my books being, long and being slow burn. Because early on, a lot of publishers were like, they're both these things, you need to cut back on them or things like that. And I was, too stubborn. And I was like, no, this is the kind of story I want to tell. You're not going to cut it back. Like, this is what feels right to me. And fortunately now, I've my readers have accepted that this is what you're going to get. You're going to get 140,000 word book or even longer than that in some case. And they're totally fine with it. I mean, I know not everyone has the time for that, and that's great. I completely understand, but I feel like I've built my name on that. And so now I've gotten to the point where I just kind of, I was like, well, what's next? What's the next step for me to grow, my name and my books out? And I've had a lot of success with my, books that have been translated in other countries and other languages. And they've done great. And I love seeing them in bookstores. And so it was kind of like, how else can I get my work out to readers who wouldn't normally take a step and be willing to, take the risk to read an indie book. Sometimes there's still kind of that stigma with some readers, I feel like, who are like, oh, well, it's not as good, which isn't true.
Right.
But yeah. So I just felt like the right time. And I love my editor. So yeah, she kind of talked me into it. I don't think I would have, she didn't talk me into it. I talked to her and it was more like, this person understands me. Let's do it,
Nice. So did you approach them or did they approach you from your sales, or how did that happen?
From what I understand, she had been asking my agent for a few years, telling her that she wanted me to come on board, but my agent knew that I wasn't in a place to where I wanted to do that. I still don't have a very deep back catalog because it takes me so long to write. But she was like, well, let's just, let's try. You can talk to her and see what happens. And I loved her. And it just, I was like, all right, let's do it. Sometimes you have to take a risk. And I was terrified, so terrified to lose control, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah. So you were agented. Were you agented as an indie author, or did you like seek an agent, or an agent sought you to kind of explore the traditional world, or?
I've had an agent for a while. I had one originally for the first 2 books, and then things didn't work out, and I found my second agent, Jane, who I just adored, and she really, understood and respected me and my vision. So she just kind of stuck along with me and helped me figure things out as we went along.
Nice. So what's been different than you expected going traditional? What's been better or worse or surprising?
For me, not really like too much has changed. Other than, opportunities like this, like talking to you, I never had those before. Um, and so that's been wonderful. I think maybe the most surprising thing has been just not having total control of
Yeah.
things anymore. That has been, I'm a little bit of a control freak sometimes, but I like, having a say in everything. But you put your trust into someone else as well, and you hopefully figure things out together. So that's been the most surprising, I think.
Nice. And has the marketing side changed for you at all? Like, were you doing marketing at all before? You said you weren't really doing a lot. So usually as indie authors, we're doing marketing. So I'm curious how that's changed.
Oh yeah, I mean, for me, marketing between one and the other hasn't changed. We still, Facebook and Instagram, and just kind of, now it's more gearing toward doing like, videos and reels and things like that. But I don't get on social media very much. That's just, not something I do very much. I love Instagram. So that for the most part hasn't changed. But now it's nice to have someone else who, has access to different platforms that I'm not used to, and that's
Yeah.
wonderful. So yeah,
Nice.
it's a little less work for me.
Great. And can I ask what you're working on next? Is that something you can talk about or?
I can kind of talk about it. I didn't write for 4 months at all this year, and I've slowly gotten back into it. And for the first time, I'm still kind of trying to get out of that writer's block I was in for so long. So I've been working on two different stories. One is an office romance, which could change, like Winnipeg changed. And then the other one is just something a little bit different. Also a romance, but just kind of a different subgenre I haven't done before. So we'll see what happens.
Excellent. And just as we're wrapping up, I just have one final question. If you could offer one piece of advice to new and aspiring authors, what would it be?
Okay, it's a very good question. I would say that just remember that nothing is universally liked. And ultimately you should just write a book that you would want to read. I mean, just write something that you're proud of, uh, and something that you would enjoy, because, you don't know if you'll have 10 people who read it, or if you'll have, 10,000 people who read it. So just, focus on yourself and what your gut tells you.
So, in I think a lot of books, and especially in romance, character flaws are very important. Having a flawed character who needs some kind of change or growth. How do you decide what flaws your characters will have?
For me, I just try to give every character some type of unique characteristic. But I don't go over the top with it, because I've read so many books where they do, and like this character's got a tick, this one's got some kind of speech impediment, this one's missing an ear, like it's always, they just kind of, it's a little too much. So it could be something as simple as referring to somebody as short, or like this person's got red hair. Like just pick out one just fairly ambiguous characteristic to single them out. And an easy way to practice this is to write conversations where you don't say character names at all, and you're forced to use descriptions of those characters in order to describe who's talking or what's going on with the scene. That's an exercise I used to give to some of my mentoring students.
So you're using that more as an identifying mark, so that the reader knows who, has a better picture of this person, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's when I have a conversation or a scene in a book, I try to keep it almost identical to it as if I were sitting across the desk from a friend of mine, telling them what happened yesterday, and explaining something. And I try to use the same language and the same comments that I would use. I think once you start going beyond that, then a writer voice starts to creep in there, and it doesn't sound quite as authentic. I mean, if you pull off the writing thing properly, the reader should forget that they're even reading a book. Like the words themselves should just kind of disappear in the story, jump out. Like if something on the page grabs them, because it's too descriptive, or it's too this or too that, it takes them out of the story. They're not in that conversation anymore. They're thinking about the word they just read.
Right.
So I stay away from the big words. I just try to keep it as simple as possible.
I try to add character flaws as part of the as almost a symbol of what the character is dealing with in the outside story. Like it's the inner conflict that matches the outer conflict. So, and I right now in my career, I'm writing a lot of it's a serial of stories. It's, it's a whole bunch of the same character doing stuff over and over again. So it's kind of, I can't just add a new flaw every book, but there's certain, things. Maybe I'll introduce a temporary flaw, like at the beginning of the story, maybe Dan Kotler gets a letter from his, long lost aunt or something, and finds out that his cousin died or something like that. This is weak, but I mean, and somehow that ends up being a theme that kind of recurs throughout the story, like death or the loss of someone or the discovery of someone or something like that. So.
Do you think about like where they're at and how they're going to grow and change? Like this character's too immature or too stubborn or like, Pride and Prejudice. This one's too prideful. This one. Do you think about that and like where they're starting with something they need to work on by the end?
I try to keep it in mind. We talked about this last week, though. I mean, a lot of my books take place over a very short amount of time. It could be a couple hours or maybe a day at the most. So it's difficult to really see some character growth there. But, when you've got an ending in mind, I think your character to a certain extent needs to adjust to meet whatever that ending is. There should be some type of change. It doesn't necessarily have to be with your lead character. I know, writing schools, teachers, MFA programs, they all push for development in your character and a different person at the end of the story versus the one you started with and that sort of thing. I don't think that's totally necessary. But that being said, like I'm writing genre fiction, it's mass market, popcorn, literary stuff. I'm not trying to teach anybody any moral lessons.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, that's pretty much the same for me. I'm not trying. Yeah, I am sometimes trying to get not. Actually, let me rephrase that because I don't think I ever like go in saying, "Hey, I want to push this moral message or this message about ethics or something." But if that theme comes up while I'm writing and doing my looping and editing and that sort of thing, like I will emphasize it if I think it's fun. Like if I think that the reader would resonate with it, then I'll go ahead and punch it up and let it like grow it, mention it, a couple of times, and then, throw in some symbolism that, helps them feel very smart. The idea is to make the reader feel very, very smart. So that's what I aim for.
Yeah, that makes sense. Mariana talked about intentionally making her books slow burn, which was kind of against what publishers were asking for. Just kind of like, no, this is what I write. You're going to love it. And I'm sticking to my guns.
Good for her.
Have you ever bucked a trend or a request from your editor to do something differently?
I do it all the time. When we wrote Dracul, like everybody felt that, there wasn't enough action at the beginning, but they wanted me to cut a ton of stuff out, and I didn't do it. I left it all in there. And for the most part, the readers didn't care. That it tends to be the editors and other writers that seem to grab that sort of thing. She Has a Broken Thing Where Her Heart Should Be, like the original draft of that book was 216,000 words. I think I cut 10,000 out. So it's almost 1,000 pages in print. People don't complain about the length. Like if you read the reviews, they'll mention the length. They'll say, this is a big book, but I read it really fast, like that kind of thing. As long as the story is moving forward, you're all good. One of the rules that I tend to impose upon myself is every chapter has to serve a purpose in the story, and it needs to move the story along. So if the characters are in the exact same place they were at the end of that chapter that they were at the beginning of the chapter, then either the chapter needs to go or it needs to be adjusted. But everything always has to move everything forward. And I think as long as you do that, it contributes to the pacing. Pacing doesn't have to mean that the story has to move fast. It just means that it has to move. Yeah.
So now my question, JD, is have you ever ignored an editor's suggestion or advice to your peril? Like ever regretted one of them?
I don't think I have, not yet. I'm sure it's going to happen. I Six Wicked Child, or no, it's Fifth to Die starts with a dream sequence.
Yeah.
Like everybody jumped on that because you're not supposed to start a book with a dream sequence. Readers don't care, like as long as you do it right and it works. I've gotten called out on that. I guess that the only thing, like in that same book, I had a second dream sequence and my editor told me to take it out. He said one, like when I pushed him on the first one, said, no, I'm keeping this. He said, well, then you should at least take out the second one. And I did follow his advice on that because that made sense to me. You can basically pull that rabbit out of the hat one time, but you don't want to do it repeatedly. An editor is just another opinion. It's an educated opinion. opinion.
Yeah.
Take it with a grain of salt, but it's ultimately your story to tell, not theirs.
So are you going to repackage some of the things that you do pull out of these books and maybe offer them as a freebie to readers? Would you do that?
I don't do that, but where they're really coming up is in the TV shows.
Yeah.
Because working closely with the writers, they're looking for material that isn't in the book because they don't want to do the book exactly the same. And they can obviously make up stuff if they want to fill in those blanks and kind of stretch it out for 8 episodes or 10 episodes or whatever. But anything I've got on my cutting room floor is obviously going to be closer to the original story than something they could come up with. Mm-hmm. So yeah, a lot of that stuff I thought would never see the light of day again. And I'm thrilled that I still have it in Scrivener and I can go back and, pull my deleted scenes and email those off relatively easily. Because back in the day, that was a Word document. You'd hit that delete key and that stuff was gone.
Yeah.
So yeah, I try to keep everything.
That's interesting. And I've heard it said, and you probably know way more about this than I do, is that when you get options, they're optioning like their characters in the world, but not necessarily the story. So, they can do other things with it and take a lot of license with it.
Yeah, you have to be very careful with that. I've got a fantastic film attorney who reviews all those things. But yeah, I mean, in most cases, they're taking their characterizations. Sometimes it's tied to a specific book, meaning that if they want to continue the story and follow, we'll use Dexter as an example. Like the Dexter series is basically based on the very first book that this guy wrote, even though there's multiple books out there. They weren't under any obligation to continue the story the same way as the future books went. Like Dexter's character, they could basically take Dexter off in their own direction if they wanted to, or they could license the additional books to do that. And a lot of that has to do with the way the contract is written. Some contracts are vague enough where they, basically have reign of all the books. Other ones are limited, like this one, where they have to come back to the well and they have to pay you if they want more. That really comes down to just having a solid film attorney. Where I've gotten tripped up is, like the characters themselves are basically tied up. So I've got I think I mentioned this before, I've got an FBI character that appears in the second and third book in my 4MK series as a fun little Easter egg. I wanted to put him in my new book, because I needed an FBI character, and I just figured I'd drop him in there. It's only like a chapter and a half, and it would be fun for the readers to see that. Ultimately, I was told to take it out because the studio would basically then have first rights to that book. And they could pass on it, and then we could take it out and shop it to other people. But it created that one more hurdle that we would have to go over. So it was just easier just to rename that character.
Yeah. And I'm interested in what you said about Dracul. They're like, cut out some in the beginning. I've kind of noticed a trend especially in movies and, TV, sometimes in books, where they're cutting out what would traditionally be like the first act. Characters, set up, ordinary world. And for me, I kind of find you get dropped in the middle of this action, but then I have a harder time connecting and caring about the characters. I'm just curious if you've noticed that, what you think about that.
I tell when I'm reading books by people that haven't been published yet, or back in the ghostwriting and book doctor days, I used to do that all the time. Almost every book, I would consider, does this first chapter need to be there? Is it a better story if we start with chapter 2 and then take whatever pertinent information from chapter 1 needs to be in the story? Just kind of find some other way to sprinkle it in. A lot of times that works. Even in your own writing, if you finish up a chapter, go back to it 3-4 days later and look at those last couple of sentences. A lot of times you can delete the last sentence, the last paragraph from that chapter, and it flows better because it basically forces the reader to turn the page to find out what happens next. One of the things that we end up doing as authors is with the end of a chapter, we tend to basically close it out. We basically, the curtain comes down and then next chapter basically starts another scene, which is great in theory, but, it gives the reader a chance to close that book. So a lot of times if you take that last little tidbit out, and it could be, like I said, one sentence, it's just enough where it creates that dangling thread where they have to turn the page to figure out what comes next, and that keeps them going. So yeah, a lot of times you can edit stuff like that out. You can't do it on the fly while you're writing. I think it's got to be done, later in the editing process.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible to edit too much stuff out of the first act so that the reader just feels like, what does this story matter?
Yeah, you can always go overboard, right? I mean, that's what you have beta readers for, and just try to find the right place.
Cool. The other thing that I think is interesting is that Mariana and other authors we've interviewed often say that the success they've had going viral on social media wasn't really the result of anything they did intentionally. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that.
from what I've seen, it's 100% true, right? Like I teased this interview out as, she's got a 250 million views on TikTok, and, hopefully she's going to give us some kind of magic formula. Honestly, the magic formula is there is no magic formula. It's all, word of mouth. It's just one thing sparks when, a nearly identical thing might, completely fizzle over on the side. Nobody really knows. Yeah, I mean, that's basically your only real takeaway, I think.
The only advice I've ever heard that I think is solidly good for building up a following or going viral or whatever on any social media platform is consistency. And I think that's where a lot of us kind of fall short, because I don't want to be consistent on TikTok. I don't want to spend hours and hours and hours dancing and making, quirky little videos. I don't care about the platform that much. So I'm never going to be a TikTok influencer. Now I could potentially be a Twitter influencer, but it seems like nobody pays any attention to me on Twitter. So if they do, they're not liking and commenting on things. But Substack, I'm getting a lot of love on Substack. So maybe I'll focus all my energy there.
Yeah. And I do think readers take it more from book talk influencers than from the author. So I think that's you can't really control that, whether or not someone finds your book and they love your book. You can in certain ways, but it's a lot harder than something you're trying to do yourself.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I see that all the time with Best of Book Talk. We have that email that goes out. I see the reviews hit, and those reviews move the needle. Because they're Siskel and Ebert used to give movie reviews all the time. I would pay total attention to that. And that's what I would go and see. If I saw an ad on TV for a movie that I knew was put out by the studio trying to get me to that movie, it just doesn't hold as much water. So yeah, it's all opinion.
Yeah. So in that arena, so Mariana was indie and then went trad, and she had done all her own marketing. I'm curious, what indie marketing tactics do you think would work for authors to bring to a trad pub book, and vice versa? Is there any of that you could control?
Well,
go ahead, Kevin.
I mean, the number one thing, and I push this when I talk to anybody, is that email list. If you're going to concentrate your marketing on any one thing, put all your time, all your money, all your energy into building up as big a platform as you can. Platform is more than just your email. It's, you're following on Amazon and BookBub and Goodreads and other platforms. But that email list, it really is going to be the most powerful tool in your box for promoting your work. Ads, I don't know if TradPub will let you run ads for things or whatever. I don't know if any of that's allowed. JD, you would know better than me, but that stuff it can be finicky. You have to do a lot of testing, and I'd rather put my money on something I would own.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I do any type of marketing I play my hand very close to my vest. Usually the publisher would, they give a marketing presentation. A lot of times it's a PowerPoint, and they just got to fly through what it is they're going to do from their side. I try to do things that they're not doing. At the same time, I don't tell them what I'm doing because I don't want them to pull their foot up off the gas on their side, thinking that I'm doing some of the heavy lifting. Facebook ads is a very good example. Kevin just brought that up. If your publisher is going to do that for you, you don't want to do it too, because you're going to end up tripping over each other. You're going to end up forcing the actual cost to click. That cost is going to go up because you're both, basically fighting for that same viewer. So if you are going to do something that your publisher is doing on your behalf, have a good dialogue on it. If you're both going to do Facebook marketing, find out exactly who they're targeting to make sure, you're targeting somebody different. Go after different groups instead of trying to go after the same group, that sort of thing.
Get good at PR too. I mean, get out there and find, podcasts. I don't know how well podcasts do for selling books, honestly, and despite us being one of the shows that helps people do that. But, it's one of those things where they say there's points of touch for people's attention. The number kind of keeps growing. How many times someone needs to hear your name, hear the title of your book before it becomes familiar enough that they take action. You want to get out there as much as possible. Even if you go on a podcast and it doesn't result in direct sales, getting your name and the title of that book out there as often as possible is a really good strategy.
Well, it's a subconscious trigger, right? You hear the author's name a couple of times on a podcast or, wherever it might be. And, you walk into a bookstore and their name catches your eye. You may not even remember why it's catching your eye, but it's going to. And that's, it's just the touch points. I think I read once you have to touch somebody that's a horrible way to phrase it. 6 to 8 times before, they'll actually pull the trigger on.
I think it's more than that now. I think it's, we've just been inundated, right? Well, look at me. I've done nothing of significance in my life, and people still know who I am because of all the podcasts I'm on. So if a schmuck like me can
you make enough noise, they have to listen, right?
They got to listen just to shut me up, if nothing else.
That's perfect. That is a perfect place to end. So, JD, who's up next week?
Next week, we've got Sally Gardner coming on. She's a former costume designer for theatrical productions in London, turned illustrator and author. Since then, she's sold more than 2 million copies all over the world. Her latest title is called The Weather Woman, and it's out now.
Sounds great. If you'd like to be notified as soon as new episodes publish, make sure you go to writersincpodcast.com and sign up now. We'll see you next episode and have a great week of writing.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.